I'm Madeline Carter, 34, and I never expected a simple question about a family reunion to shatter my world. We were having our monthly dinner at my parents' house when I casually asked about the upcoming family gathering. The table fell silent. My brother Jason's face twisted with anger as he spat, "You're not invited. None of us want you there after what you did." My fork clattered against my plate. What I did? My parents looked down, avoiding eye contact. That's when I realized they'd discovered my role in exposing the family business scandal that nearly sent my father to prison. If you've ever had that moment when your family turns against you, you know exactly how my heart dropped at that dinner table. I still remember the taste of betrayal in my mouth. Before I continue this roller coaster of family drama, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button if you've ever felt like the black sheep in your family, and subscribe to catch more true family stories like mine. Now, let me take you back to understand why my own brother would cut me off so coldly. The Carters of Boston were what most people would consider the quintessential American success story. From the outside, we had it all. My father, Richard Carter, built Carter Financial Services from nothing into a respected wealth management firm with an impressive client roster including some of the most influential families in New England. My mother, Kathleen, was the perfect corporate wife and socialite, hosting charity galas and sitting on multiple boards while maintaining our sprawling colonial home in Brookline with meticulous care. Then there were the three of us kids. Jason, the firstborn son and golden child at 38, had followed directly in our father's footsteps. After Harvard Business School, he returned to join the family business, clearly being groomed to take over someday. My younger sister Rachel, 29, was the baby and family favorite, pretty, pleasant, and perfectly willing to play by all the family rules. She worked in the marketing department of the firm, but was primarily focused on planning her perfect wedding to her equally perfect fiancé from another well-connected Boston family. And then there was me, Madeline, the middle child, who never quite fit the Carter mold. I was too analytical, too questioning, too unwilling to simply accept the family script. Instead of joining Carter Financial after college, I pursued my own path as a financial auditor for one of the big accounting firms in the city. My father never quite forgave me for that perceived betrayal, though he'd never say so directly. The Carter name means something in this town, he'd remind us at least monthly. We have a reputation to uphold. And uphold it we did, at least on the surface. We gathered every month for family dinner at my parents' house, a tradition that felt more like an obligation than a pleasure. Everyone would dress up, talk about appropriate topics, and pretend that we were the perfect family. Appearances were everything. At these dinners, Jason would dominate the conversation with stories about important clients or golf games with influential people. My father would beam with pride, while my mother would nod approvingly. Rachel would talk about wedding plans or charity events. And I would sit there feeling like an anthropologist studying a strange culture, trying to find the right moments to contribute something that wouldn't earn one of my father's disapproving glances. Jason and I had a complicated relationship since childhood. As children, we were always competitive, but as adults, our relationship had cooled to distant politeness. He viewed me with suspicion, as if my choice not to join the family business was a personal affront to him. The truth was simpler. I wanted to build something for myself, to know that my achievements were my own and not handed to me because of my last name. Despite the emotional distance I felt from my family, I had idolized my father growing up. Richard Carter was a force of nature, charismatic, brilliant with numbers, and seemingly invincible in the business world. He had built his company through sheer force of will, or so the family mythology went. Even as I carved my own path, part of me still sought his approval, rare as it was. It was this lingering desire for connection that led me to agree when he asked for my help 6 months ago. The company was implementing a new accounting system, and he wanted someone with outside expertise to review the transition. I was flattered it was the first time he had ever acknowledged my professional skills. "You've got a good head for numbers, Maddie," he said, using my childhood nickname that he rarely used anymore. "I could use your eyes on this." I spent several weekends at the office, going through the books, comparing the old system to the new. That's when I found the first discrepancy. It was small, easy to miss if you weren't looking closely, an account that didn't reconcile, numbers that didn't add up. I thought it was a simple error at first. But as I dug deeper, more irregularities emerged. Transactions with no clear purpose, money moving between accounts in patterns that made no sense for legitimate business operations. Client funds that disappeared and reappeared in different amounts. The evidence pointed to something I couldn't ignore: significant tax fraud and embezzlement spanning years. Millions of dollars had been moved through the business in ways that clearly violated financial regulations. This wasn't a simple accounting error, it was systematic and intentional. I remember sitting alone in the empty office late one Sunday night, staring at the spreadsheets on my laptop, feeling physically ill. This couldn't be right, not my father, not the business that bore our family name. I must have made a mistake, but the numbers don't lie. And I, Madeline Carter, was now faced with the most difficult decision of my life: confront my family with what I'd found or pretend I never saw it. The following week, I requested a private meeting with my father. We sat in his corner office with its impressive view of Boston Harbor, the same office where I'd spent countless hours as a child, drawing pictures while he worked late. "Dad, I found some inconsistencies in the accounts," I said carefully, sliding a folder across his expansive mahogany desk. He barely glanced at it. "Nothing to worry about. Just some creative accounting strategies, standard practice." "No, Dad, this isn't standard practice. This looks like fraud." My voice was barely above a whisper, but it might as well have been a shout for how his face changed. "You don't understand how this business works, Madeline," he said, his voice hardening. "There are complexities you don't grasp. I suggest you mind your own business." "But this is illegal. If the authorities ever looked into this, they won't," he cut me off. "And this conversation is over." I left his office shaken. That evening, I tried calling Jason, hoping my brother might listen to reason. We met at a bar near his Beacon Hill apartment. "You need to drop this," Jason said immediately after I explained what I'd found. His normally perfectly coiffed hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it anxiously. "Dad knows what he's doing." "You know about this?" I asked, suddenly realizing the truth. "How long?" "Long enough. He wouldn't meet my eyes. It's how the business stays competitive. Everyone does it." "No, they don't, Jason. And if this comes out—" "It won't come out unless someone talks," he said sharply, finally looking at me directly. "Are you going to talk, Maddie?" I couldn't sleep for days. The weight of what I knew pressed down on me like a physical thing. I called my best friend Laura, an attorney, though I was careful not to reveal specific details. Hypothetically, I asked her over coffee in a crowded cafe where we wouldn't be overheard: if someone discovered financial fraud in a family business, what would their options be? Laura didn't miss a beat. Hypothetically, they could report it anonymously as a whistleblower. There are protections for that. And hypothetically, what would happen to the business? To the people involved? Depends on the scale and duration. Fines, certainly. Possibly criminal charges for the responsible parties. But, she added, reaching across to squeeze my hand, if they cooperated early, it could minimize the damage. I spent the next week in agony, weighing family loyalty against my own moral compass. I thought about the clients, many of whom were regular people who had trusted Carter Financial with their retirement savings and children's college funds. I thought about my father, who could potentially face jail time if this was discovered through an official investigation. I thought about the Carter name that meant so much to him. On a rainy Tuesday night, after 3 sleepless nights in a row, I made my decision. I anonymously reported what I had found to the Securities and Exchange Commission through their whistleblower program. I provided enough evidence to start an investigation but held back some details, hoping that my father would cooperate when confronted and reach a settlement. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within weeks, SEC officials were at Carter Financial's offices, confiscating records and interviewing staff. My father hired high-powered attorneys, who managed to negotiate a plea deal: substantial fines for the company, probation for my father, but no jail time. The scandal was minimized in the press, described as accounting irregularities rather than the systematic fraud it actually was. Still, the damage was done. Several major clients pulled their business. The firm's reputation was tarnished. My father was forced to step back from day-to-day operations as part of the agreement, leaving Jason in charge of the diminished company. Through it all, I maintained my distance and my silence. No one in my family knew I had been the whistleblower. I told myself I had protected them from worse consequences. I had done the right thing ethically while still shielding my family as much as possible. I continued to attend the monthly family dinners, though they were now more strained than ever, with my father looking older and more tired each time. I thought I had made the best of an impossible situation. I was wrong. If your stomach is in knots just listening to this story, trust me, I felt the same way making these choices. Family and ethics aren't supposed to be on opposite sides. Have you ever had to choose between doing what's right and protecting someone you love? It's the kind of choice that keeps you up at night, wondering if there was another way. As this story continues, you'll see just how high the price can be for following your conscience in a family that values loyalty above all else. The dining room felt like it was closing in around me. I stared at Jason's face, contorted with rage, then looked at my parents. My mother's eyes were brimming with tears. My father sat stone-faced, his dinner forgotten. I don't understand, I said, though the sick feeling in my stomach told me I understood perfectly. What are you talking about? Don't play innocent, Jason snarled. We know you were the whistleblower. You reported your own family to the SEC. My mouth went dry. How did you— It doesn't matter how we know, my father interrupted, his voice unnervingly calm. What matters is that you betrayed this family. You nearly destroyed everything I built. I was trying to protect you, I said desperately. If it had been discovered through a routine audit or a client complaint, the consequences would have been much worse. You could have gone to prison, Dad. Save it, Jason cut in. You've always been jealous of what Dad and I built. You couldn't stand that you weren't part of it, so you tried to tear it down. That's not true, I protested, looking to my mother for support. Mom, you have to believe me. Kathleen Carter had always been the peacemaker in our family, the one who smoothed over conflicts and maintained harmony. But now she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of disappointment and something close to disgust. How could you betray your own blood? She whispered. After everything your father has done for you. Done for me? I repeated incredulously. Like what? Pressure me to join a business I knew wasn't right for me? Make me feel like an outsider in my own family because I wanted to build my own career? We gave you everything, my father said coldly. The best schools, the best opportunities. The Carter name opened doors for you that would have remained closed otherwise. And this is how you repay us. Rachel, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. I looked up to you, Maddie, she said quietly. Her engagement ring caught the light as she twisted her hands anxiously in her lap. How could you do this to us? I wasn't doing it to you, I insisted. I was trying to do what was right. The fraud was wrong. It was illegal. It was hurting clients who trusted us. Us, Jason repeated sarcastically. There is no us's anymore, Madeline. You made your choice. My father stood up slowly, placing his napkin precisely on the table beside his plate. As of tonight, you're no longer a Carter, he said with chilling finality. I want you to leave this house and not return. You're not welcome at family functions. You're not to contact any of us. Dad, please, I said, my voice breaking. Can't we talk about this? I was trying to do the right thing. The right thing would have been loyalty to your family, he replied. You chose differently. Now live with the consequences. My mother was openly crying now. Rachel stared down at her plate. Jason watched with cold satisfaction as my father delivered his verdict. Please leave now, my mother said through her tears. Just go, Madeline. I stood on shaky legs, grabbing my purse from the back of my chair. You're making a mistake, I said, looking at each of them in turn. What happened wasn't my fault. It was the fraud that caused all of this, not me reporting it. No one responded. No one even looked at me. I walked out of my childhood home in a daze, the door closing behind me with a quiet click that somehow felt more final than a slam would have. The carefully manicured front lawn, the stone path I had walked thousands of times, the neighborhood I grew up in, all of it suddenly felt alien. I sat in my car for several minutes, too stunned to drive, watching the shadows move behind the dining room curtains as my family presumably continued their dinner without me. My hands shook as I finally started the engine and pulled away from the curb. The 15-minute drive to my apartment in Cambridge passed in a blur of streetlights and tears. I parked haphazardly, not caring if I got a ticket, and stumbled up to my third-floor walk-up. Inside, I collapsed onto my couch, the full weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. My family had cut me off completely. In their eyes, I was the villain, the traitor who had damaged the precious Carter name. They couldn't or wouldn't see that I had tried to protect them, to do the right thing while minimizing the damage. As I sat alone in my darkened apartment, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. Not in reporting the fraud I still believed that had been the right ethical choice, but in thinking I could remain part of my family afterward. Perhaps I had been naive to think my family valued integrity as much as I did. My phone buzzed with a text from Laura. "How was dinner?" I couldn't bring myself to respond. How could I explain that my entire family had just disowned me? That I was suddenly alone in the world in a way I had never been before? Instead, I turned off my phone, curled up on the couch, and let myself cry until there were no tears left. The days following my family's rejection blurred together in a haze of grief and disbelief. I called in sick to work for 3 days, unable to face colleagues or clients while feeling so raw. When I finally did return, I went through the motions mechanically, my mind constantly replaying the dinner confrontation, searching for something I could have said or done differently. I tried calling my parents the day after the dinner. My call went straight to voicemail. I texted my mother, "Please, can we talk?" No response. I even sent an email to my father's personal account, explaining again my reasoning and asking for a chance to discuss things. It bounced back he had blocked my email address. Rachel's phone would ring, but she never picked up. After 5 attempts, I received a brief text, "I can't talk to you right now, please stop calling." My attempts to reach extended family were equally futile. My father's sister, Aunt Patricia, who had always been kind to me, answered my call but was coldly formal. "I'm sorry, Madeline, but your father has explained the situation to us. We can't get involved in this." "Did he tell you his version, or did he tell you what actually happened?" I asked bitterly. "Family loyalty isn't a version, dear," she replied before ending the call. I found out later that my father had contacted everyone, cousins, aunts, uncles, even family friends, with a carefully crafted narrative that painted me as a jealous, vindictive daughter who had tried to damage the family business out of spite because I hadn't been given a leadership role. The story was absurd to anyone who knew me well, but it gave everyone the excuse they needed to avoid getting involved. My work performance suffered as I struggled to concentrate on audits and reports while dealing with the emotional turmoil. My boss, Ellen, called me into her office after I made a careless error on an important client report. "Is everything all right, Madeline?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "This isn't like you." I gave her a sanitized version of the truth: family disagreement, temporary estrangement, and promise to get my work back on track. She was understanding but firm about expectations moving forward. I couldn't afford to lose my job on top of everything else. Laura was my lifeline during this time. She came over with takeout and wine, listened to me vent and cry, and never once said "I told you so," though she had warned me that whistleblowing, even anonymously, could have serious personal consequences. "I never thought they would cut me off completely," I confessed to her one night, curled up on my couch with a glass of red wine. "I knew they'd be upset if they found out, but I thought eventually they'd understand I was trying to protect them." "Some people can't see past their own pride," Laura said gently. "Your father built his identity around that business. Anything that threatens it, threatens him. But what about my mother? Rachel? Even Jason, we were close once when we were kids. They're following your father's lead. They always have, right?" She was right, of course. The Carter family orbited around Richard like planets around the Sunday. His values, his priorities, his decisions were law. Loyalty to him and to the Carter name had always been the primary directive. As weeks passed without any contact from my family, my emotions cycled between grief, anger, and a strange sense of liberation. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Melissa Chen, who helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a form of bereavement. I was mourning the loss of my family relationships and the identity I had as part of the Carter family. "You're experiencing something called ambiguous loss," Dr. Chen explained during one session. "Your family is physically alive but psychologically absent from your life. It's particularly challenging because there's no closure, no ritual like a funeral to mark the end." In our sessions, I began to unpack patterns in my family that I had normalized growing up: my father's controlling behavior, the conditional love based on compliance with family expectations, the emotional manipulation used to keep everyone in line. Your decision to report the fraud wasn't just about ethics, Dr. Chen suggested. It was also an act of individuation, separating yourself from toxic family patterns. I wasn't sure I was ready to see it that way. Part of me still longed for reconciliation, for my family to realize they had overreacted and welcome me back. I had dreams where we were all together again, laughing and close like we had been when I was very young, before the family business had grown so large and success had become the only acceptable outcome. But as 1 month turned into 2, and 2 into 3, with no contact from any member of my family, I began to accept that reconciliation might never happen. I started to rebuild my life without them, focusing on my career, strengthening my friendships, even tentatively beginning to date again. The panic attacks that had plagued me in the first weeks after the confrontation gradually subsided. I could go days without thinking about my family, only to be blindsided by grief when I saw a mother and daughter shopping together or overheard someone talking about a family gathering. The hardest part was questioning whether my family had ever truly loved me unconditionally, or if their love had always been contingent on my obedience and conformity. Had I ever really belonged, or had I just been playing a role to maintain peace? I don't know if any of you have experienced being cut off by family, but let me tell you, it's like grieving someone who's still alive. There were days I could barely get out of bed, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. But there were also moments of clarity when I realized I couldn't have lived with myself if I'd stayed silent. If you're going through something similar, know that healing isn't linear. Some days you move forward, others you slide back, but eventually you start building a new normal. Speaking of which, if this story is resonating with you, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything during vulnerable shares like this. Now, back to what happened next, because this story takes an unexpected turn. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon in April, about 3 months after the confrontation, when my phone lit up with a text from a number I instantly recognized. Rachel. Can we meet? Somewhere private. Don't tell anyone. My heart raced as I read and reread the message. After months of silence, this cryptic request both thrilled and terrified me. Was this a genuine olive branch or some kind of trap? I decided it didn't matter. This was my first opportunity to reconnect with any member of my family, and I had to take it. Of course. When and where? I replied immediately. We agreed to meet at a small cafe in Cambridge, far from both our usual haunts and any chance of running into mutual acquaintances. I arrived 20 minutes early, selecting a table in the back corner where we would have privacy. Rachel walked in precisely on time, her eyes darting around nervously before spotting me. She looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under her eyes partially concealed by makeup. She was dressed impeccably as always, but there was a tension in her movements that I had never seen before. "Thank you for coming," I said as she slid into the seat across from me. "I've missed you." She nodded, fidgeting with the sugar packets on the table. "I can't stay long. Jason thinks I'm at a dress fitting for the wedding." "How are you? How's everyone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Not good," she admitted. "Dad's stressed all the time. The business is struggling. We've lost more clients than they're admitting publicly. Mom's drinking more than usual." "Jason is." She trailed off, looking troubled. "Jason is what?" "Angry. All the time. He's obsessed with figuring out how you knew about the financial issues, who might have helped you. He hired a private investigator to look into it." My stomach dropped. "A PI? Is that how they found out I was the whistleblower?" Rachel nodded. "He found emails between you and your friend Laura discussing whistleblower protections. Nothing specific, but enough for Jason to put it together. I made a mental note to warn Laura that her privacy might have been compromised." "Rachel, why are you here?" "Not that I'm not happy to see you, but after 3 months of silence," she took a deep breath. "Because I think you should know the whole truth, Maddie. What you found, the fraud, the tax evasion, it was just the tip of the iceberg." I stared at her, not comprehending at first. "What do you mean?" "Some of Dad's clients." She lowered her voice to barely above a whisper. "They're connected to organized crime. The Mancini family in Providence, the Donovans in Southie. They've been using Carter Financial to launder money for years." The cafe suddenly seemed too hot, too small. "That's not possible. Dad wouldn't. He would, and he did, Rachel interrupted. I found out by accident last year. There's a separate set of books for those clients. Jason manages them directly now. I felt physically ill. Does Mom know? Rachel nodded grimly. She's always known. That's why she drinks so much, I think. To forget. My God, I whispered. If the SEC had found that during their investigation, Dad would be in prison right now, Rachel finished for me, and possibly Jason too. Your whistleblowing actually protected them, Maddie. You gave them a chance to clean up the most obvious problems before the investigation went deeper. The irony was almost too much to bear. I had been cast out of the family for an action that had actually saved them from much worse consequences. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Rachel looked down at her hands, which were trembling slightly. Because I can't take it anymore. The lies, the pretending. Jason's been pressuring me to publicly denounce you at the wedding, to make some big statement about family loyalty. He wants me to scrub any mention of you from the event, to act like you never existed. And what do you want? I asked softly. Tears filled her eyes. I miss my big sister. I miss the person who always told me the truth, even when it wasn't what I wanted to hear. I know what you did took courage, and I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you. I reached across the table and took her hand. You're standing up now. That counts for something. I'm not as brave as you, she said. I can't cut ties with them completely. Not yet, but I couldn't let you think you were alone anymore. We talked for another hour, making plans to meet occasionally, in secret. Rachel wasn't ready to openly defy our family, but she wasn't willing to abandon me either. It was a small crack in the wall of isolation that had surrounded me, but it felt monumental. As we prepared to leave, Rachel hugged me tightly. Be careful, Maddie, she whispered. Jason's not just angry, he's scared. And Dad's connections with those clients. They're dangerous people. Watch your back. I watched her walk away, a mixture of emotions swirling within me, relief at reconnecting with my sister, fear about the true nature of the family business, and a growing realization that my whistleblowing had inadvertently protected my family from potentially violent repercussions. For the first time in months, I didn't feel entirely alone. But I also understood that the situation was far more complex and dangerous than I had ever imagined. 6 months after my sister's revelation, I had settled into a new normal. My career was thriving. I had been promoted to senior auditor, with a corner office and a small team reporting to me. I had strengthened my friendship circle, joining a book club and a hiking group, building connections that helped fill the void left by my family's absence. Rachel and I met once or twice a month, always in out-of-the-way places where we wouldn't be recognized. She kept me updated on family matters. My father's health had been declining due to stress. My mother was going through the motions of her social obligations, while becoming increasingly dependent on medication and alcohol, and Jason was running the company with an iron fist, cutting staff and implementing draconian policies to maintain profitability. The business had stabilized somewhat, though it was a shadow of its former self. More importantly, according to Rachel, Jason had severed ties with the most dangerous clients, the organized crime connections my father had cultivated. Whether this was due to ethical concerns or fear of further investigation, Rachel couldn't say. I was at home late one Friday night, unwinding with a glass of wine and a novel, when my phone rang. It was nearly midnight, and the screen displayed Rachel's name. She never called this late. Rachel? Is everything okay? Her voice came through in panicked gasps. It's Dad. He's had a heart attack. They've taken him to Massachusetts General. It's bad, Maddie. Really bad. My mind raced. Despite everything, this was still my father. I'll be there as soon as I can. Jason and Mom are already here. They don't know I'm calling you. I understand. I'm on my way. I hesitated only briefly before grabbing my keys and purse. This was my father, whatever his flaws, and I needed to be there. If my family rejected me again in the hospital, so be it. I would deal with that possibility when it arose. The hospital was brightly lit despite the late hour, the emergency department bustling with activity. I found my way to the cardiac care waiting room, where I immediately spotted my mother sitting rigidly in an uncomfortable chair, staring at nothing. Jason paced near the window, speaking intensely into his phone. Several extended family members and close family friends clustered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones. Rachel sat alone, and her face flooded with relief when she saw me. She rose to meet me, squeezing my hand briefly before leading me to a seat somewhat removed from the others. "How is he?" I asked quietly. "In surgery. They're doing an emergency bypass. The doctor said the next few hours are critical." I nodded, scanning the room. No one had reacted to my arrival yet, though I could see a few curious glances from distant cousins. "Does Mom know you called me?" Rachel shook her head. "No one does. But you had a right to be here." It didn't take long for Jason to notice my presence. He ended his call abruptly, his face darkening as he strode toward us. "What the hell is she doing here?" he demanded of Rachel, not even looking at me directly. Rachel stood, surprising me with her firmness. "She's our sister, and this is our father in surgery. She has every right to be here. After what she did, she's the reason he's in there right now. The stress she caused with her betrayal." "That's not fair, Jason," I interrupted, standing to face my brother. "Dad's condition is the result of decades of choices. His diet, his work stress, genetics, not my actions." Jason finally looked at me, his face contorted with the same anger I'd seen at the dinner months ago. "You don't get to speak about him. You don't get to pretend you care now." "I never stopped caring," I said quietly. "You all cut me off, remember? Not the other way around." Several heads turned in our direction, and I realized we were creating a scene. My mother had finally noticed my presence, her expression unreadable as she watched our confrontation. "This isn't the time or place," Rachel interjected. "Dad is fighting for his life. Can we please just put aside everything else for now?" Jason glared at me for a long moment before returning to his spot by the window, pointedly turning his back. I sank back into my chair, feeling the weight of hostile or curious stares from around the room. My mother hadn't moved or acknowledged me in any way. Hours passed in tense silence. I stayed for Rachel's sake, and because despite everything, I needed to know if my father would survive. Around 3 a.m., a surgeon in scrubs appeared, asking for the Carter family. We all gathered around him, my mother, Jason, Rachel, and me standing slightly apart. "Mr. Carter made it through the surgery," the doctor said, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "He's stable but critical. The next 48 hours will tell us more about his prognosis, but he's a fighter." My mother began to cry softly, and Jason put an arm around her shoulders. Rachel squeezed my hand out of sight of the others. "When can we see him?" Jason asked. "He's in recovery now. Once he's moved to the ICU, you can visit briefly, 2 at a time. That probably won't be for a few hours." The surgeon left, and the tension in the room eased slightly with the good news. Family members began to disperse, promising to return in the morning. Soon, only the 4 of us remained. "I think it's best if you leave now," Jason said to me coldly. "You've seen that he's stable. You've done your duty. Go." "Jason!" Rachel protested. "She's been waiting all night just like us." "It's okay," I said to Rachel, gathering my purse. "I'll check in with you later." As I turned to leave, my mother spoke for the first time since I'd arrived. "Madeline." I turned back, hardly daring to hope. "Yes, Mom?" "Thank you for coming." Her voice was flat, emotionless, but it was the first acknowledgement she had given me in 9 months. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and walked out of the waiting room. In the elevator down to the parking garage, I let the tears I'd been holding back all night finally fall. It wasn't reconciliation, not by a long shot, but it was something, a tiny crack in the wall between us. I had no idea that this moment of tentative connection would be shattered by what came next. I returned to the hospital the following afternoon, after a few hours of fitful sleep. Rachel had texted me that our father was now in the ICU, and doing as well as could be expected. She also warned me that Jason was still hostile to my presence, but our mother seemed to have softened slightly. The ICU waiting room was less crowded than the emergency department had been, with just my immediate family and a few close friends of my parents. I took a seat in a corner, acknowledging those who met my eyes with a nod but not approaching anyone directly. Rachel brought me a cup of coffee and sat beside me, keeping her voice low. "Mom actually asked if you were coming back today." "Really?" "What did she say exactly?" "Just, is Madeline returning?" But her tone wasn't angry. "I think seeing Dad like this has put things in perspective for her." My heart lifted slightly at this news. Maybe my father's health crisis could be the catalyst for healing our family rift. That hope was short-lived. Jason, who had been speaking with a doctor near the nurse's station, returned to the waiting room and immediately noticed me. "I thought I made it clear you're not welcome here," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I took a deep breath, determined to remain calm. "Jason, I'm here because Dad is in the ICU. Can we please put aside our differences until he's recovered?" "Put aside our differences?" He laughed bitterly. "You mean put aside the fact that you deliberately tried to destroy this family? That you betrayed your own father and brother for what, some misguided moral superiority?" "That's not what happened, and you know it," I replied, standing to face him. "No? Then explain to everyone here." He gestured around the waiting room, where every face was now turned toward our confrontation. "Why you reported your own family to the SEC. Explain how that wasn't betrayal." Something in me snapped. Months of isolation, of being vilified by my own family, of carrying the burden of my decision alone, it all came pouring out. "Fine, you want the truth? Here it is," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. I discovered systematic financial fraud in the family business. Not small accounting errors, major, criminal financial misconduct that had been going on for years. I confronted Dad about it privately. I talked to you about it privately. Both of you dismissed my concerns and told me to mind my own business. Jason's face reddened. "You had no right." "I had every right as a financial professional who discovered criminal activity," I interrupted. "I reported it anonymously to protect the family from worse consequences. If it had been discovered through a regular audit or by a client, Dad would likely be in prison right now instead of the ICU." Murmurs spread through the waiting room as relatives and friends absorbed this information. "And that's not even the whole story, is it, Jason?" I continued, past the point of caution now. "Rachel told me about the organized crime connections, about how the company was laundering money for the Mancinis and the Donovans. Did everyone here know about that? Did they know that my whistleblowing actually protected the family from potential violence when those clients discovered the SEC investigation?" Jason went pale. Several gasps came from around the room. Clearly, this information wasn't widely known even among close family friends. "You don't know what you're talking about," Jason sputtered, but his confident demeanor had cracked. "Don't I? Should we ask Mom? Or should we wait until Dad can tell everyone how deep those connections went?" Before Jason could respond, a doctor appeared in the doorway. "Carter family? Mr. Richard Carter is awake and stable. He's asking for his family." The timing couldn't have been more dramatic. My mother rose shakily from her chair, supported by a family friend. Jason shot me a venomous look before following her. Rachel hesitated, looking between me and the doctor. "You should go," I told her softly. "I'll wait here." She squeezed my hand gratefully before joining our mother and brother. I sat back down, suddenly aware of the stares from everyone else in the room. Some looked shocked, others confused or skeptical. I had just publicly aired the family's darkest secrets, and there was no taking it back. About 20 minutes later, just as the tension in the waiting room had begun to dissipate, 2 men in suits entered. They scanned the room before approaching the nurse's station and showing identification. "FBI," I heard one of them say clearly. "We need to speak with Jason Carter." The nurse directed them to my father's room. Minutes later, they emerged with Jason between them, his face a mask of controlled panic. "What's happening?" Rachel asked as they passed. "Just need to ask your brother some questions, ma'am," one agent replied professionally. They led Jason to a small consultation room down the hall, closing the door behind them. Rachel hurried over to me. "FBI? What's going on?" "I have no idea," I said honestly. "This isn't because of what I reported that case was settled." We didn't have to wonder long. My mother emerged from my father's room, looking shaken. She approached us directly the first time she had willingly come near me in months. "Your father wants to see you, Madeline," she said quietly. "Both of you." I followed her back to the ICU room, Rachel close behind. My father looked small and fragile in the hospital bed, connected to various monitors and IV lines. His complexion was gray, and he had aged years in the months since I'd last seen him. "Maddie," he said, his voice weak but clear. "Sit down." I took the chair beside his bed cautiously. "How are you feeling?" He waved away the question. "Jason is in trouble. Serious trouble. The FBI agents? Rachel asked. My father nodded. They've been investigating him for months. He continued the illegal operations even after the SEC settlement. But worse, he's been embezzling from the company itself. From our clients. I was stunned. Jason has been stealing from Carter Financial? Yes. I just found out yesterday. That's what triggered. He gestured weakly at his chest. The heart attack. The stress of discovering what he'd done. I don't understand, my mother interjected. Why would he need to steal? He makes a very good salary. Gambling debts? My father replied tiredly. Online poker, sports betting, hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions. The realization hit me like a physical blow, so when he accused me of trying to destroy the family business, he was projecting, my father finished. You were trying to protect it. He was actually destroying it from the inside. I sat back, trying to process this revelation. For months, I had been vilified as the traitor, the disloyal daughter who had betrayed her family. All while Jason, the golden son, had been systematically stealing from the very business he was supposed to be saving. There's something else you should know, my father continued, his voice growing weaker. Jason was the one who hired the private investigator. He figured out you were the whistleblower and convinced me and your mother that you'd done it out of jealousy and spite. And you believed him, I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. I wanted to believe him, my father admitted. It was easier than accepting that I had created a culture of corruption that my own daughter felt compelled to report. Easier than admitting I had failed as a businessman and a father. Tears filled my eyes. It wasn't quite an apology, but it was the closest my proud father had ever come to acknowledging his mistakes. In my bedside table at home, he continued, addressing my mother, there's a folder. Evidence I gathered yesterday about Jason's embezzlement. The FBI will need it. My mother nodded, clearly struggling to maintain her composure. Madeline, my father said, turning back to me. I was wrong about you. We all were. Before I could respond, a nurse entered to check his vital signs, informing us that we needed to leave so he could rest. In the hallway outside, my mother hesitated before placing a hand on my arm. Will you come to the house with me? To get that folder? I nodded, recognizing this request for what it was, the first tentative step toward reconciliation. As we walked toward the elevator, we passed the consultation room where Jason was being questioned. Through the small window in the door, I could see his face a mixture of defiance and fear. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, I understood that everything had changed. The truth was finally unraveling, but the cost had been nearly unbearable for everyone involved. The scene at the hospital quickly descended into chaos after my mother and I returned with the folder of evidence. FBI agents were still questioning Jason in the consultation room, but word had spread about his arrest. Extended family members huddled in shocked groups, whispering among themselves and casting uncertain glances in my direction. When the agents finally emerged with Jason between them, he was officially under arrest. They had apparently found enough evidence in my father's documents to justify taking him into custody immediately. As they led him through the waiting room, my mother stepped forward. Jason, she said, her voice breaking. How could you do this? To your father? To the business? To all of us? Jason's confident facade had crumbled entirely. He looked broken, almost unrecognizable from the self-assured brother I had known all my life. I'm sorry, Mom, he said quietly. It got out of control. I never meant for it to go this far. As they led him away, he turned to look at me one last time. There was no anger in his expression now, just resignation and something that might have been shame. The waiting room erupted once Jason was gone. Relatives who had been coldly ignoring me hours before now approached with questions, as if I had suddenly become the family authority on the situation. Did you know about Jason's embezzlement? My cousin Michael asked. Is that what you reported to the SEC? I shook my head. No, I only knew about the tax fraud and some client account manipulation. Jason's personal embezzlement came later, apparently after the SEC investigation. My mother, who had been standing silently nearby, suddenly collapsed into a chair and began to sob openly, something I had rarely seen her do in my entire life. Kathleen Carter had always maintained perfect composure in public, no matter the circumstances. I've known, she admitted through her tears, addressing no one in particular. I've known about the business irregularities for years. Richard always said it was necessary to remain competitive, and I believed him, or pretended to believe him. Family members gathered around her awkwardly, unsure how to respond to this unprecedented display of vulnerability. The organized crime connections too? I asked quietly, kneeling beside her chair. She nodded miserably. Not at first. That came later, after some financial troubles in the early 2000s. Richard was desperate to save the business. Once those relationships were established, there was no way out. You don't just stop working with people like that. So when I reported the fraud, I was terrified, she confessed. Not just of legal consequences, but of what those clients might do if they were exposed. That's why I went along with cutting you off. Richard and Jason convinced me it was the only way to contain the situation. Watching my perfectly put-together mother crumble before my eyes was heartbreaking, but it was also strangely liberating. For the first time in my life, I was seeing the real Kathleen Carter, not the carefully constructed facade she had maintained for decades. "Mom," Rachel said gently, "did you know about Jason's gambling? About the embezzlement?" "No," she said firmly. That would have crossed a line even for me. Cheating the government or bending rules for certain clients was one thing in my mind. Stealing directly from innocent clients who trusted us? Never. As family members continued to process these revelations, a nurse approached to inform us that my father was asking for me again, alone this time. I found him looking marginally better than before, some color returned to his face. "Jason?" he asked as soon as I entered. "Arrested. The FBI took him away about 20 minutes ago." He closed his eyes briefly. "I suspected as much. The evidence was substantial. Why did you keep it in your bedside table? Were you planning to turn him in?" "I hadn't decided," he admitted. "I was going to confront him first, give him a chance to make it right. Then the chest pains started, and I sat in the chair beside his bed. Dad, there's something I don't understand. If you discovered Jason's embezzlement yesterday, why was there a folder full of evidence already compiled?" He sighed heavily. "Because I've suspected for months. Since right after the SEC settlement, actually, client complaints about missing funds, discrepancies in reports, I started investigating quietly." "Why didn't you confront him sooner?" "Pride," he said simply. "I couldn't bear to believe that my son, who I'd groomed to take over the business, could betray me like that." Sound familiar? The irony wasn't lost on me, so that's why you were in my room that day. You were looking for documentation of Jason's activities. My father looked surprised. "What are you talking about?" "The day of our monthly dinner, when everything fell apart, Rachel told me you were in my old bedroom earlier that day going through my desk drawers. I assumed you were looking for evidence of my whistleblowing." He shook his head slowly. "I wasn't in your room that day, Madeline." Then, who I stopped as the realization hit me, Jason. He was the one who found evidence linking me to the whistleblowing. He was probably looking for something to use against me because he suspected I was onto his embezzlement. "And then he convinced us that you were the traitor," my father concluded, while he continued stealing right under our noses. The full picture was finally becoming clear. Jason had orchestrated my family exile not just out of anger at my whistleblowing, but as a calculated move to protect himself. With me discredited and cut off, no one would believe any accusations I might make about his activities. "He used the family's anger at me as cover for his own crimes," I said, the bitterness evident in my voice. "And I let him," my father replied quietly. "I chose to believe him over you because it was easier than accepting my own failures." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of months of misunderstanding and pain hanging between us. "There's one more thing," my father said finally. "In that folder, there's a document about the family trust. I changed the terms yesterday, before I knew about your involvement with the SEC. I removed Jason as a trustee and beneficiary. I was going to name Rachel instead, but now, I'd like to reinstate you, Madeline, if you're willing." The gesture was significant, representing not just financial trust, but a restoration of faith in me as a member of the family. "I don't know, Dad," I said honestly. "A lot has happened. Trust has been broken on all sides. It can't be fixed with just a legal document." "I understand," he said, looking older and more vulnerable than I had ever seen him, "but I hope it can be a start." As I left his room, I felt the weight of years of family dynamics shifting. The truth was finally emerging, painful as it was. And with it came the possibility, however fragile, of something new and perhaps more authentic rising from the ashes of the Carter family legacy. 1 year later, I stood in the kitchen of my parents' home, helping my mother prepare dinner. It was a scene that would have been unimaginable 18 months earlier, when I had been permanently banished from family gatherings. Now, I was not only present but actively participating in family life again, though everything had changed. The family business no longer existed. Carter Financial Services had been sold to a larger firm to pay the substantial penalties and client restitution, resulting from both the original fraud and Jason's subsequent embezzlement. My father, now retired, had managed to avoid prison due to his cooperation with authorities and health concerns, instead receiving probation and community service. Jason hadn't been so fortunate. He was currently serving a 5-year sentence for fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. The gambling addiction that had driven his crimes had come to light during the trial, along with the full extent of his manipulation of family members. His betrayal had been the hardest for my father to accept. The golden son who had been groomed as heir to the Carter legacy had nearly destroyed it completely. "Is the salad ready?" my mother asked, checking the roast in the oven. "Almost," I replied, slicing cucumbers with practiced efficiency. Our relationship had been the first to begin healing after the truth about Jason emerged. Initially, tentative phone calls had progressed to coffee dates, then longer visits. We had both started therapy separately, and then eventually together, working through decades of dysfunctional family patterns. "Your father's in the study with Rachel and Ben," she said, referring to Rachel's husband of 6 months. "Would you mind telling them dinner's in 10 minutes? I found them looking at old family photos, my father pointing out stories behind various images. He looked up when I entered, his face lighting up with a smile that still surprised me sometimes. Richard Carter had never been demonstrative with his affection, but his heart attack and the family upheaval had changed him profoundly. "Dinner's almost ready," I announced. "Maddie, come look at this," Rachel said, holding up a faded photograph. "Remember this camping trip? You were so mad when Jason put that frog in your sleeping bag." I examined the picture, all 3 Carter children beside a lake, arms around each other, grinning widely. Before the business had grown too large, before success and appearances became the family religion, before everything went wrong. "We were happy then," I observed. "We can be happy again," my father said quietly. "Different, but happy." The road to this moment had been far from smooth. After Jason's arrest, there had been months of legal proceedings, financial restructuring, and painful conversations. My father had grudgingly acknowledged that my whistleblowing had ultimately saved the family from worse consequences, though the admission clearly cost him pride. The criminal connections had been severed during the initial SEC investigation, sparing us from potential retribution when the full extent of the fraud became public. Extended family relationships had shifted dramatically as well. Some relatives had apologized sincerely for believing the worst about me, while others remained distant, uncomfortable with the family's fall from grace. I had established clear boundaries with everyone, no longer willing to participate in the facade of family perfection that had defined the Carters for so long. My mother had struggled the most with our changed circumstances. The loss of social status had initially devastated her, but with therapy and time, she had discovered parts of herself that had been suppressed for decades: artistic interests, genuine friendships beyond the social climbing variety, and a more authentic relationship with her children. "I invited Laura for dessert," my mother said when we returned to the kitchen. "I hope that's all right." The fact that my mother had not only accepted but embraced my best friend, the woman who had supported me through my family exile, was perhaps the most tangible evidence of how much had changed. "Of course," I replied, touched by the gesture. Our family dinners now were smaller affairs, no longer the extended family gatherings designed to showcase Carter's success, but intimate meals focused on rebuilding connections. My father had sold the Brookline mansion, downsizing to a comfortable but modest home in Cambridge, closer to where Rachel and I both lived. As we gathered around the table, I observed the empty chair that would have been Jason's. Despite everything he had done, his absence was still felt. Rachel occasionally visited him in prison, though my parents had only gone once. I had written him a letter but received no response. Some wounds were perhaps too deep to heal, at least for now. "Shall we?" my father asked, indicating that we should begin eating. The conversation during dinner flowed more naturally than it ever had during the formal Carter dinners of the past. Rachel and Ben talked about their plans to start a family. My mother discussed a painting class she had started taking. My father, who had been volunteering with a business mentorship program for at-risk youth as part of his community service, spoke passionately about a promising student he was working with. I shared news about my own career. I had left my previous firm and started a small consulting practice specializing in ethical financial practices and fraud prevention, ironically drawing on my family experience as a case study, with all names changed, of course. "I'm proud of you, Madeline," my father said unexpectedly. "You stood by your principles even when it cost you everything. That's true integrity." Coming from Richard Carter, who had once valued success and appearance above all else, this compliment meant more than I could express. After dinner, as we sat in the living room with coffee and the pie Laura had brought, I reflected on the journey of the past year and a half. The family I had lost and then partially regained, the truth that had been buried and then painfully excavated, the relationships that had been tested, broken, and in some cases, rebuilt on more honest foundations. The Carters would never again be the prestigious, powerful family we once were. The fortune was mostly gone, the business sold, the social connections diminished. But in their place was something that had been missing for as long as I could remember: authenticity. We were no longer pretending to be perfect. We were finally allowing ourselves to be real, with all the messiness that entailed. As I looked around at the faces of my family, imperfect, wounded, but present and trying, I realized that while justice had been served in ways I never anticipated, the true victory wasn't in vindication or revenge. It was in the possibility of building something new from the ruins of what had been lost. A family defined not by appearance or achievement, but by honesty, accountability, and genuine care. The Carter name might no longer mean something in this town, as my father used to say, but perhaps it could mean something more important within our own hearts, a commitment to living truthfully, whatever the cost. And that, I decided as I accepted another slice of pie from my mother, was worth more than all the success in the world. Family is complicated, isn't it? I never expected my story to end this way, with hard truths bringing us closer together rather than further apart. I've learned that sometimes the most painful reckonings lead to the most genuine healing. If my story resonated with you in any way, I'd be so grateful if you'd share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between loyalty and integrity? How did it change your family dynamics? I read every comment and find strength in our shared experiences. If you'd like to hear more stories like mine, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. And if you found value in what I shared today, sharing this video might help someone else feeling alone in their family struggles. Thank you for listening to my journey. May you find the courage to stand in your truth, whatever that looks like for you.